We begin in North Africa, where 1 month after security forces moved in to clear out camps supporting ousted Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi, protests have continued in Cairo and some provinces. This is despite the extension of a curfew. Security forces have been blocking vital routes from protesters to prevent them from setting up a new sit-in area.
After Friday prayers, Muslim Brotherhood supporters staged rallies in different parts of Egypt. They said this is to commemorate the people killed in the clearing of Rabaa al-Adawiya Square on August the 14th. They held the pictures of Morsi with 4 fingers, which became a symbol of the Rabaa al-Adawiya sit-in. Slogans were chanted against the army chief Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who led the overthrow of Mohamed Morsi on July the 3rd. The fresh protests come as Morsi was remanded in custody for another 30 days. He faces charges of jailbreak, murder, as well as spying for the Palestinian Hamas movement, according to the official news agency Menes. The deposed president is accused of communicating with Hamas during upheaval in January 2011 when ex-president Hosni Mubarak was toppled. Friday's protests also come 1 month after severe clashes broke out between the police forces and Muslim Brotherhood supporters. More than 600 people were killed then at Al-Nada Square and Rabaa al-Adawiya Square, where leaders of Muslim Brotherhood have sought refuge since the ouster of Morsi. Well, 1 month on, the protests continued, though on a much smaller scale. According to the Ministry of Health, 1 person died and a dozen others got injured in Friday's protests. Friday's curfew started at 7 p.m, but the protests went on and the march extended for almost 100 meters. Egypt has now extended its state of emergency by 2 months, which was first imposed also on August the 14th. Jinkyo, CCTV.
Meanwhile, former Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak, his sons Alaa and Gamal, and former Interior Minister Habib al-Adli are scheduled to appear in court after their hearing was adjourned on August 25th. This case relates to their alleged involvement in the killing of protesters during the 2011 revolution. Mubarak faces charges, other cases relating to corruption and illegal funding. Mubarak was controversially released from prison on August 22nd and placed under house arrest. A panel of experts appointed to examine the charges is expected to be sworn in ahead of the hearing. Now, for the latest on the situation in Egypt, we're joined by our correspondent Adil Maruki. He's live in Cairo. Adil, there seems to be no let-up by protesters supporting the former President Mohamed Morsi. What is the situation now? Is calm returned to Cairo?
Well, it's generally calm. There hasn't been any significant reports of any protests so far. We are expecting protests maybe after the noon prayer here in Cairo, but most of them will be mainly by the end of the day, where the heat of the sun would break down, and we expect to see some rallies as yesterday. Analysts believe that the groups will not be as big as before since the arrest of many leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood. They have lost their ability to amass huge protesters in the streets. They still believe that there are many and proceeding to call for their main demand is the reinstatement of President Mohamed Morsi and then the restoration of the constitution and the parliament at the same time. But of course, right now Egypt is looking for a new constitution. It seems that this type of argument or reaching an agreement, reaching a middle ground does no longer exist, because mainly now they are still keeping their demands, which is far from what is the country proceeding with at the moment. Yet the Muslim Brotherhood and their supporters vow to continue their rallies, and they have a belief that when they continue they will finally reach what they aspire for the country.
Now, Adil, looking at this extended state of emergency, are there any concerns that there could be instances of abuse, especially when it comes down to this clampdown on the Muslim Brotherhood, also looking at wanting to restore security to Egypt? Are there concerns that it could go just a bit too far?
Well, there are many concerns, particularly from human rights activists and organizations here, that the longer the emergency state will last, most probably some violations could erupt. And this is what they have been warning from since the beginning and since the government's decision to evacuate the camps in Cairo. This has happened with the evacuation of the camps, and many now report and are still blaming the government for the excessive use of force, despite there have been confirmation that some or few protesters had armed weapons in confrontation with the security forces, yet still many are accusing both the army and mainly the interior minister for the abuse of force, and they expect that the longer that this situation will take, the longer such violations will be reported, because the emergency state basically states that the security forces have the right to detain anyone without a court order, and therefore we have seen thousands of Muslim Brotherhood supporters being detained, and now we're starting to see some of them getting out by a court order because they were not, or there are no proof for their involvement in any of the cases.
Now, Adil, if I'm not mistaken, are you outside the military barracks waiting for the start of this trial of Hosni Mubarak, and what's the latest on that?
Well, the trial has started and the court has begun by taking oath from experts that will be involved in the three main cases that it is currently looking at. He has got professors of engineering and construction to be specialized in what is known as the villas case, which is basically purchasing three villas at Sharm el-Sheikh resort at the Red Sea from a prominent businessman in return for favors for authority. It's one of the abuse of power cases reported or filed against Hosni Mubarak. Their mission will mainly be to evaluate the prices of the villas and the renovations made in these villas and compare it to the prices that the Mubarak family paid at the time when they purchased it. Also, there is another team that is composed of experts from the armed forces and from the interior ministry, and from also the engineering, professors of engineering specialized in dynamics and projectiles to evaluate the use of weapons and compare them to the injuries reported during the clashes that erupted on the 25th of January in 2011. And the third one is from petroleum professors, petroleum engineering. They will also investigate the same corruption case that involves the same businessman in the Sharm el-Sheikh villas, Hussein Salem, who both are accused of conspiring with Mubarak to actually give him or facilitate a natural gas export deal to Israel through his company, and therefore selling it with much less prices than its normal rates, and Hussein Salem would make billions of dollars from that deal. So this is what has happened. Now the court has adjourned for 15 minutes of recession. Then when it comes back, the judge will announce how the court will proceed for the rest of the trial.
All right, Adil, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thanks very much. I'm sure we'll catch up with you on developments later in the day. We're speaking there to Adil Maruhi live in Cairo. Now, in other news making headlines across the continent, more than 1,000 prisoners have been pardoned and released from prison in DR Congo. This follows an order from the Minister of Justice and Human Rights. About 700 detainees at the Makala Central Prison in Kinshasa benefited from the parole. However, political and military prisoners have not been included. The move is the third of its kind in 4 months by the Congolese government. It aims to decongest prisons whose funding weighs heavily on the public treasury. Now, elsewhere, opposition parties in Guinea have threatened to boycott legislative elections slated for later this month. That's if the Commission fails to publish voter lists by Thursday. The Guinean government and the opposition reached a UN brokered deal in July to hold the long-delayed elections on September 24. The deal followed a spate of unrest that killed at least 50 people. A spokesperson for the opposition has accused President Alpha Conde of manipulating voter lists in favor of the ruling party. And finally, the rising water levels on the banks of the Nile River in the city of Bor in South Sudan has left a trail of destruction. Over 5,000 families have been affected, hundreds of people displaced, and more than 400 houses damaged. The river Nile broke its banks on Tuesday, rising more than 1.5 meters, flooding different areas of the city. Peacekeepers from South Korean military engineers serving with the UN mission in South Sudan have been involved in attempts to contain the flooding. Now, in a developing story that we've been keeping a close eye on, efforts are still ongoing to resolve the Syrian crisis. Let's now cross live to a briefing by the U.S. Secretary of State, the Russian Foreign Minister, and the Arab League envoy.
Send Foreign Minister Lavrov here to pursue this effort was essential to getting to this point. And I want to thank Sergei Lavrov for his diligent efforts and the efforts of his entire delegation, who worked hard and in good faith to overcome difficulties and even disagreements in order to try to find a way through tireless efforts to get us where we are today. I also want to thank Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius of France, with whom we've partnered and consulted, as well as Foreign Minister William Hague of the United Kingdom, both of whom will meet with me in Paris on Monday in order to discuss the road ahead. For nearly 100 years, the world has embraced the international norm against the use of chemical weapons. And the principles that the United States and the Russian Federation have agreed on today can, with accountable follow-through, allow us to expedite the elimination of serious chemical weapons. Providing this framework is fully implemented, it can end the threat these weapons pose not only to the Syrian people, but also to their neighbors, to the region, and because of the threat of proliferation, this framework can provide greater protection and security to the world. We said at the outset that to accomplish our goal, this plan had to produce transparency, accountability, timeliness, and enforceability. It must be credible and verifiable. If fully implemented, we believe it can meet these standards. The world will now expect the Assad regime to live up to its public commitments. And as I said at the outset of these negotiations, there can be no games, no room for avoidance, or anything less than full compliance by the Assad regime. I thank Sergei Lavrov for his efforts to try to guarantee the genuine aspects of this framework. So let me just outline specifically where we are and the steps that the United States and Russia have agreed to take under this framework. First, the scope. We have reached a shared assessment of the amount and type of chemical weapons possessed by the Assad regime, and we are committed to the rapid assumption of control by the international community of those weapons. Second, specific timelines. The United States and Russia are committed to the elimination of Syrian chemical weapons in the soonest and safest manner. We agreed that Syria must submit within a week, not in 30 days, but in 1 week, a comprehensive listing, and additional details will be addressed regarding that in the coming days. Third, the unprecedented use of chemical weapons convention procedures is an important component of this framework. We have committed to use extraordinary procedures under the Chemical Weapons Convention for the expeditious destruction and stringent verification of Syrian chemical weapons. Fourth, verification and monitoring. In the interest of accountability, the United States and Russia have agreed that the Syrians must provide the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons and supporting personnel with an immediate and unfettered right to inspect any and all sites in Syria. Fifth, destruction. We have agreed to destroy all chemical weapons, including the possibility of removing weapons for destruction outside of Syria. We have also reached a side agreement on methodology. Finally, sixth, our agreement today strengthens the OPCW, the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons, Executive Council decision to use the Chemical Weapons Convention extraordinary procedures in order to ensure full implementation. It also provides for UN administrative and logistical support to the OPCW for inspections and destruction. In the event of non-compliance, we have committed to impose measures under Chapter 7 within the UN Security Council. Ultimately, perhaps more so than anywhere in the world, actions will matter more than words. In the case of the Assad regime, President Reagan's old adage about trust but verify, doverai no proverai, I think is the saying, that is in need of an update. And we have committed here to a standard that says verify and verify. But I also want to be clear about the end game here. If we can join together and make this framework a success and eliminate Syria's chemical weapons, we would not only save lives, but we would reduce the threat to the region and reinforce an international standard, an international norm. We could also lay the groundwork for further cooperation that is essential to end the bloodshed that has consumed Syria for more than 2 years. What we agreed on here today could conceivably be the first critical concrete step in that direction. The United States and Russia have long agreed that there is no military solution to the conflict in Syria. It has to be political. It has to happen at the negotiating table. And we, together, remain deeply committed to getting there. From the beginning, President Obama has repeated again and again, there is no military solution. We must find a political solution through diplomacy. Foreign Minister Lavrov and I have long talked about the importance of creating the conditions for a political settlement that implements the Geneva I communique. We will very soon be meeting again. We've agreed to meet on the margins of the UN General Assembly with Lakhdar Brahimi in order to try to advance these two linked parallel efforts. Now, we have no illusions about the challenges ahead. The United States and Russia have not always seen eye to eye, that is known. And we still don't see eye to eye on everything. But we will not lose sight of the fact, together, that the implementation of this framework, which will require the vigilance and the investment of the international community and full accountability of the Assad regime, presents a hard road ahead. Ensuring that a dictator's wanton use of chemical weapons never again comes to pass, we believe is worth pursuing and achieving, and President Obama is determined that we work hard in the days ahead to travel a path of conscience and to achieve our goals. And we know that President Putin and Sergei Lavrov are committed to that endeavor. Thank you.
Уважаемые дамы и господа, также присоединяюсь к выражению признательности вам за терпение. Не буду интерпретировать документы, которые мы согласовали здесь, они будут распространены, каждый из вас сможет с ними ознакомиться. Отмечу лишь, что документы консенсусные.
Right, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov speaking there. But just before, we were listening in to U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry outlining some of the framework to have weapons, chemical weapons removed from Syria. They've been meeting for 2 days in Geneva and will continue talks in Paris on Monday, ultimately looking at a political rather than a military solution to what's happening in Syria. He's outlined some of the scope, assessed the weapons and the number that are in Syria that need to be removed, and of course monitored at a later stage and also come under destruction. Well, it's time now for a short break. When we return. At a crossroad, we examine why many youths in Zimbabwe are not ready to take up leadership. And electronics headache, we tell you how Uganda plans to deal with e-waste management.
You have been charged with murder. How do you plead?
Not guilty.
We are receiving some harsh criticisms.
I therefore salute the Kenyan voters for rejecting that blackmail.
And then saying that ICC is targeting Africa.
Do not make it difficult for us.
This week, Talk Africa delves into Africa's love-hate relationship with the International Criminal Court and poses the question, what next, Africa?
Welcome back. Zimbabwe's youth have enjoyed an elevated status in recent years. The government set up several schemes to lend them money to start their own business. And more young people are also going into politics. But many feel they still can't fully assume the role of future leaders. CCTV's Farai Mwakatuya has found out why.
There is no shortage of passion or political awareness. Young people here believe they are well educated and capable of solving Zimbabwe's problems. But they still need to do more.
The sense of political direction our country must take still needs to be really taught to our young people. There is division in the youth movement about where Zimbabwe must go. Political parties, particularly at the level of the youth, are not agreed on what Zimbabwe should be.
Several young people have made it into parliament and a few even into the new government. But many young people lack the financial muscle to compete. AC Lumumba has first-hand experience. He was the youngest candidate in the last election, running on a ZANU-PF ticket and narrowly losing out.
Oh, politics is tough, my brother. Politics is not only tough, but it is very expensive. You need to be able to afford playing the game. It's an expensive game.
Despite having the numbers, many aspiring young leaders may not realize their dream anytime soon. Farai Mwakatuya, CCTV, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Uganda is seeking to stem the import of second-hand computers and cell phones. Authorities fear they could harm the environment, but traders say the plan could hurt them and their customers. CCTV's Isabel Nakiria has that report from Kampala.
For 12 years, Abdu Katerega has imported and sold used electronic and household items from Europe. He says many Ugandans cannot afford to buy new, so his imports meet an important demand.
Most African countries, basically in Uganda, there is no hire purchase. People have to buy all the items up front. You have to use all the money you have, all your savings, just to buy those items. And going into those quality shops, for example, the Samsung, the Panasonics, is actually expensive depending on what people earn.
Many Ugandans also believe used items from the West are better than new ones.
One day I got an electric shock after using my brand new iron box. I had to go for a used one, which I have been using for 10 years now. In my home, I can't go for new products. I prefer used ones.
But there is a downside, so-called e-waste. A UN report indicates the imports of used goods into Africa are growing 20% every year. In many Western countries, it's cheaper to send old electronic goods to Africa than to recycle them. Several African countries, worried about the environmental impacts, are now seeking to stop the influx. Uganda is among them.
They contain heavy metals such as lead, cadmium, mercury, and chromium. When they get into the environment, they contaminate it, they pollute it, and a human being, upon consuming substances that are contaminated or are polluted with these heavy metals, they cause cancer among several other illnesses.
Katerega denies that his stock is dangerous.
They're tested because there is a regulation that you're not supposed to bring items that are not tested. And you get a certificate for the container before you ship them down to Africa.
Enforcing the ban also could be difficult. In 2010, Uganda banned the import of used refrigerators, but many second-hand stores still sell them.
One proposal under discussion is to impose a levy to raise the prices of used items. Ugandan authorities say they will take a gradual approach to try and lessen the impact on local businesses. Isabel Nakiria, CCTV, Kampala.
Artists from all parts of Ghana gathered at the third edition of the Ghana Street Art Festival, commonly referred to as Chale Wote. The festival aims at promoting and nurturing an alternative art in Ghana. More than 200 artists took part in the two-day festival, with hundreds of Ghanaian fans and lovers and tourists benefiting through an array of entertainment in the town.
The festival aims at promoting and nurturing an alternative art in Ghana. Many people say it's an event of its kind. The art festival features acrylic street painting, stencil work, graffiti murals, sidewalk painting, among others. This year, the festival welcomed projects by internationally acclaimed participants, ranging from artists to designers, who collaborated to make Accra's only street art festival an enthralling affair.
The main purpose is to, one, have community engagement, in the sense that we bring art into the community, art that is not necessarily seen in the community, into the community. So, one, to take art out of the galleries into the streets, such that people who necessarily will not have the opportunity to go to the galleries will be able to interact with it. And also to help people reimagine who they are.
30 visual artists from Ghana also showcased their work. The two-day event is a production of Accra.Alt in association with the Foundation for Contemporary Art Ghana, among other organizations. It drew over 4,000 people. Organizers say its success was due to collective effort of many people from diverse fields like artists, musicians and writers to designers, students and activists.
We believe it's a merge of cultures. Chale Wote is actually a merge of cultures. It's a street art festival, and it's just nice to be a part of this program and to give Ghana that sort of mix of identity and culture merging.
As the curtains of Chale Wote closes, Jamestown town, where the event was held, not only remains a popular tourist destination for those seeking to see the remnants of Accra's colonial past, but it's a place where distinctive art meets. Jane Keo, CCTV.
Right, with that, we wrap up this edition of Africa Live. Remember, you can stay in touch with Africa Live on Twitter using the handle @CCTV News Africa, or you can visit our Facebook page and @CCTV Africa. I'm Famida Miller. Thanks for watching.